I think asking why a game is difficult is more complex a question than we might perceive it to be. Celeste was 2018's indie darling by Matt Makes Games, a 2D platforming side-scroller with light puzzles, vibrant pixel art, a grooving soundtrack, and a rigid, tenacious difficulty. Hitting obstacles once usually means death, and its learning curve rockets upwards within the first hours, constantly introducing new mechanics that it wants you to figure out for yourself. But Celeste also treats its difficulty a bit differently. It's not all a challenge for the sake of the challenge. Celeste is a game about mental health, depression, and self-doubt. You climb a literal and figurative mountain. Characters you meet along the way repeatedly doubt your willingness and determination to continue. But if you can match Celeste's tenacity with tenacity of your own, you'll find it's actually a relatively forgiving experience. Levels are split into several mini-stages, platforming sequences that, when done correctly, can take less than 10 seconds to complete. When you fail, Celeste starts you back at the beginning of the stage within a few seconds, most likely not far from where you died. These stages are structured to purposefully make you fail. Traps are premeditated, deliberately set to catch players missing a jump or losing attention. There's a balancing act between these stages' harsh difficulty and the waltz of bouncing between trial and error until you hit the correct jumps and make it to the other side. Celeste uses difficulty in its gameplay as much as it does narratively. The struggle up the mountain is mirrored both in story and play, giving the difficulty greater reason to exist than just to exist, and what makes this special is that not all difficult games can claim this. A few months ago, I made a video about Cuphead's difficulty, a similar 2D side-scroller by Studio MDHR that is really hard, much more difficult than Celeste. I didn't think Cuphead needed to be as hard as it was. The experience relied too heavily on its difficulty and, in turn, became exhausting, lacking pace or flow. An easier version would have made Cuphead more enjoyable. And where Cuphead unrelented, Celeste relents. Not only do restarts happen quickly and usually close to where you failed, but there's an optional assist mode that allows you to slow the game down to help time jumps or even make your character invincible. These features don't undercut Celeste's commitment to challenging gameplay, its goal of being an adventure against adversity. In fact, I find Celeste's treatment of difficulty more fulfilling. And really, in a lot of cases, difficulty isn't solely a result of gameplay itself, but the consequences of failing at that gameplay. From Software titles like Dark Souls and Bloodborne, which, keep in mind, I do really enjoy, are famous for being bitterly difficult, and at least in my experience playing, the bigger worry isn't their mechanically clean combat or creepy monsters, but the results of failing that combat, having to make the trek back to where you died, fight all the same enemies over again, and retrieve the souls you dropped when you died so you can upgrade your character. Difficulty in From Software titles isn't just death from an enemy defeating you, but the long list of tasks you have to perform afterward to make up for that failure. Personally, that's an element I've never found appealing in those games. The combat's great, but their elongated repetition I never really liked. Through its fast, addictive pattern of attempts and reattempts, Celeste avoids the occasional monotony Dark Souls and Bloodborne fall into, while matching the artistic meaning and substance behind their difficulty, in their case, games about death, reincarnation, and perseverance. I often praise games for staying committed to a concept, for staying true to what the developers want a game to be, or feel how they want it to feel. Likewise, you might be one to argue that Cuphead's or Dark Souls and Bloodborne's difficulty is essential to the game simply because that's how their developers envisioned them, and I don't think that's a totally unreasonable point. But staying so stubbornly committed to such harsh difficulty restricts certain audiences from playing and limits what the games themselves can do. I will concede that in some cases this may be an unavoidable consequence of genre or gameplay. The rigidity of military simulators like Postscriptum and Arma is essential not only to the games, but their genre too. Alter elements like limited HUDs, slow movement, realistic ballistics, and low health, and you'll fundamentally change what they are as games. But if you added an option to make Cuphead a bit easier, would that fundamentally alter the game it is? I don't think it would. Celeste could be a lot harder if it wanted to be, and a whole lot less forgiving. Yet, even with this forgiveness, Celeste still manages to put the player's resolve to the test while respecting their time and patience. It lets you, the player, learn for yourself just what you can accomplish. It's a brilliant approach to difficulty that perfectly fits Celeste's story of facing and overcoming adversity, and it all creates one of the more challenging and enjoyable 2D side-scrollers I've played in a long time.